Liz, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Lorraine. Thank you so much. If you'll be sure to sign in on the chat bar, if you can find it, that would be great. If not, then Stephanie Moss will sign you in.
Mm.
But you can just put your name. You don't have to put anything else, but just to help us make sure that we get you credit. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And I am so glad that you all are here tonight and so appreciate you taking the time out of your evening schedule to come and be a part of this. Gwen, and I'll be talking a little bit more about Gwen in a moment too, but Gwen shared during one of our guided learning pre-service training classes as part of the CASA panel. And when she finished, Jen and I stayed on to Zoom for about 10, 15 minutes and said, we need for Gwen to do this class for our CASA volunteers. She is so well versed, and I'll let her tell you about her full-time job that she does, but she has a lot of experience professionally in keeping confidentiality and compliance with confidentiality and so forth. And because that is such a big part of what we do in order to provide the best advocacy that we can for our children, we just think that this is a win-win, and we're so grateful to Gwen to be sharing this with us tonight. So before we get started, I did just want to mention to you all that we do have more trainings coming up each month, typically the last week prior to the new month. You'll be getting a newsletter from us, an e-newsletter that Stephanie gets out, and we'll have our upcoming training opportunities available to you. So please, if you're not getting the e-news, reach out to your supervisor. If you're not currently on a case, reach out to any one of us on staff to let us know that, because there's a lot of really good information for upcoming training, for new practices, best practices, highlighting different people or different things that are going on around us. And so we just want to make sure that you all are getting that great information. Just a couple to mention that are coming up. We have a Fostering Futures session 1 that's coming up this Thursday night. And you can send either Stephanie or I a message in chat if you want more information about that. I'm not certain if maybe Jen is at her maximum number of people she can have or not, but we can let you know about that. But that's 2 days from now, Thursday. I believe it's from 5 to 7. It could be 5 to 8. I'm not absolutely certain. We're going to have a new guided learning pre-service class starting on March the 15th. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to us as well. It would be a really good refresher if it's been a while since you've done the training, or if you did some of the very old curriculum. It's something that you can do on your own, and then you meet with Jen and the class for about an hour to debrief. And I think those who have participated in that could encourage you that that's a really wonderful way to kind of get a refresher and make sure that you're remembering all those wonderful tidbits that we taught you during training. We are also going to be doing a class on court etiquette and maybe some more in-depth on writing court reports that will be coming up. And we've also got a book club that will be coming up in April. So if you're someone who loves to read, I encourage you to get online, go to the library. I know I got it for free on Audible, but it's called The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And it's a really wonderful book, and we'll be doing a book club discussion around that as well. So we'll be sure to keep you updated, but I wanted to just throw out some of those trainings. If you have ideas for things you'd like to learn more about, please reach out to Stephanie or Jen and I and let us know, and we will do our best to try to add some of those trainings that will benefit you for the work that you do. So I think I have talked enough. Again, I'm so grateful to Gwen Pruitt, who is here with us to lead this training tonight on CASA confidentiality and compliance and confidentiality. Gwen, actually this month, has been with the CASA program for 9 years. And we are so grateful that she has continued to advocate over these 9 years while working full-time, and just so grateful for all of the advocacy work that she's done. I'm going to let you, Gwen, tell them about your work and what kind of brings you to this specialty of confidentiality and compliance. And if you all have questions, I'm sure that Gwen will be offering up time for questions, but you could also type something in the chat bar, and Stephanie and I will try to watch those so that when we have an opportunity that we can ask those questions, or Gwen may direct you to ask them just when they come up. So Gwen, I'm going to pass it off to you, my dear. And I don't know, Gwen, if you're muted perhaps, but.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
there we
And I
go.
was trying to find the button, and of course it moves around with every meeting I have, it seems like. But I really appreciate you having me speak to the group. My background is in compliance and privacy. I've been with Baptist Health Medical Group now for several years, but Baptist Health for about 11, both in compliance and privacy. I work in Paducah, Madisonville, and across the state. My farthest clinic is in Madison, Indiana, and I circle around and have Metropolis, Illinois. So all across the state, the medical practices, physical therapy, urgent cares, all that good stuff. So I won't say there's not a privacy question I haven't encountered, because I can still be surprised, but certainly we have addressed a lot. And as you can imagine, with the public health emergency that we have had, that privacy has been a big to-do with COVID. It really has been, especially in the early days. It was the same thing as saying you had HIV. People did not want others to know, and it became a real question of how do we handle this data. And so that's the experience that I bring to you. As far as the chat, I've got a very small screen, so I don't have the chat up, but certainly if Liz or anyone sees something, just give me I can see Liz perfectly, so you can just wave at me. But I welcome any questions you have as we go along, or I'm going to give you my email address at the end, and you can hit me up privately, and I'm more than happy to entertain any questions you have that way. But we're going to talk about confidentiality and privacy, and while we often use those terms interchangeably, they do have a little bit of a different connotation. When you're thinking along the lines of confidentiality, it's more of an ethical tenet. It's something that you write into contracts and agreements. It's an expectation as part of whatever it is you're doing. And for us as CASA volunteers, confidentiality is an expectation. And as we see later in the slideshow, you will see that there's actually a little clause that says what will happen if it's not maintained. And that's the key. You know, most companies that write confidentiality into an agreement need to tell you what's going to happen if that confidentiality is breached in some way. And so that is definitely covered as far as CASA is concerned. Privacy itself is a little bit more law related. So I'm going to point the differences out as we go along, just to make the point. But don't lose sight of the fact that what we're talking about is just protecting information about our clients and our cases, not only those that we're on the case for, but others that we hear about. As you're sitting in court, you still have an obligation to keep that information confidential, even if it has nothing to do with you, maybe especially because it has nothing to do with you. So just keep that in mind. I often say confidentiality and privacy is not where you ask forgiveness. You ask permission first. Yeah, that's highly important, because it's really tough to walk it back after you've already said it, right? So you need to be sure that you can share it, you can say it, and those kind of things before you move on. So that's just a small difference. So when we're thinking along the lines of where we're headed with this conversation, I'm trying to advance and it is not wanting to advance. Let me try. There we go. Try that way. It's always nice to know where we're headed in a conversation. And these are a few of the things that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the origins of confidentiality and privacy, not because I'm going to test you or that it's just highly important information. I just think it's kind of fun to know how long it's been around and what led to us all thinking that we have the right to privacy. We're going to talk a little bit about an unauthorized disclosure versus a breach. And this is more informational for you, probably personally, when it's your data that you're thinking about here, because that really is related to the HIPAA law that everybody is an expert in now. We're going to talk about the cost of privacy violations, because there are some costs involved with that in way of a fine, reputation. It's all not always just money, but reputation. If CASA got a reputation that everybody was losing case files left and right, then who would trust any of us with any of that information? So reputation is huge when it comes to privacy and compliance. We're going to talk about the ramifications of lost information. We're going to talk a little bit about confidentiality with our cases. And I went out and pulled some of the national guidelines for CASA and GALs for that to kind of get us going. We're going to talk about ways to safeguard that information. And then my favorite topic of the night I like to end with, and I've done this several times, is we're actually going to talk about the internet, the World Wide Web, and we will talk really deep and specific about the dark web, because people have heard about it, but I'm amazed how few people know anything about it. You just know it's out there, you're afraid of it, you don't know how to get there, and that's all you need to know. Well, I want to give you a little bit more education on that for sure. So again, we're going to look at these origins of privacy here. You can see as far back as 1890 in the Harvard Law Review, there was an attorney by the name of Samuel Warren and a U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, in the right to privacy. This is really the first thing that we see out there that references any individual's right to privacy. What's interesting is that the reason that this came into being, and keep in mind this is 1890, is they really felt like people had the right to be let alone. That is in this information, that each individual has the right to be let alone. So about 130 years ago, they started talking about privacy because one big thing was becoming popular at that time, and it was photography. And so that was the first reason to kind of even be concerned about privacy. And believe it or not, the second reason would be because of sensationalist journalism. So that's nothing new, people. That's been around for 130 years or so, that people have really been doing that kind of stuff as far as journalism goes. Now, confidentiality history, this, everybody's heard of the Hippocratic Oath, most likely, if you've been around medicine at all. Most of your clinicians take some sort of oath and make a promise to follow this here. What's really interesting here is that it started around 400 BC. And you can see the definition at that point: whatever in connection with my professional service or not in connection with it, I see or hear in the life of men, which ought not to be spoken of abroad, I will not divulge, as reckoning that all such should be kept secret. So that's a very lengthy way of saying keep your mouth shut if you shouldn't be talking to others about it. And it has, as you can see over time, been improved upon a little bit. And in more recent years, you can see that whatsoever you shall see or hear of the lives of men or women, which is not fitting to be spoken, you will keep inviolably secret. So that is your part of the Hippocratic Oath. It's not all of it, just part of it, but that's just kind of an interesting component right there, just to give you some background. So the right to privacy itself, we talked about, that was driven more by law, right? That's not ethical, it's really law. And so here's some laws. And again, I'm not going to focus a long time on this, but I think it's really interesting to see that through the years, and almost always in response to a problem, certainly, that we have come up with laws that have been passed to protect our privacy in some way or other. In the Privacy Act of '74, Congress did that so that the government itself couldn't just disseminate information about individuals without your permission. So that was huge legislation at the time. You can see that there's the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970, which will protect individuals' financial data. I even threw in this Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule in 1998. There started to be concerns because who was online in 1998? It wasn't us older folks, it was kids. And people were targeting children in the 90s like nobody's business. So there had to be a little bit of regulation come in there. You also see the Freedom Act of 2015, a more recent one that really and truly, this one was pretty big. It stopped the collection of millions of Americans' phone records by the government. It also keeps companies such as Microsoft, Google, Facebook, AOL, and companies like that cannot release information about you without a warrant. So believe it or not, these are really good for the individual. I'll get it in a minute, protects each one of us individually. So keep that in mind. I also listed on here that there are many state laws that govern data privacy. So when you hear about Target or some financial institution that has breached people's information, it's not the same as HIPAA, it's not the same as medical, but there are state laws that govern that data privacy, and there are civil and criminal penalties under most every one of these laws out there. But like I said, just a little bit of background on that. As I said, I would kind of segue and point out the difference between privacy law itself out there from HIPAA, because HIPAA is what we all associate with confidentiality. In fact, people will say, you know, well, is that a HIPAA violation? Wow, that's very specific to the law, but HIPAA really does only apply to what you see there on the screen, your health plans, your healthcare clearinghouses, your healthcare providers. That can be LabQuest, that can be Anthem Insurance, anybody that's dealing with medical information. They are the ones that are actually considered covered entities here, and they are bound by this particular law, HIPAA. So you are not breaching HIPAA. If you lose paperwork, you can't be sued for HIPAA. HIPAA itself does not allow for a private civil cause of action, which means that you cannot be individually sued for HIPAA. Now, if you get information and you go out and you talk it up and you slander somebody with it, that's different. But HIPAA itself does not allow for an individual to be sued. So if we're involved in a breach at work, and that might happen on occasion, I won't give away all our dirty secrets, but occasionally we have a breach of information. One of the first things that every person wants to know is who did it? Who's the person who did it? And I don't give a name. I don't give a name of our employee who did it because they cannot be individually sued and there's no benefit to come from that. Now, trust me, I also get reports from patients that tell me who did it. You know, they may know already if there's problems out there, but a person cannot be sued individually for HIPAA. That doesn't mean that these covered entities, that hospital cannot be in trouble in some fashion with the government. The way it happens is if you have a patient make a complaint to the OIG, for instance, or a patient can make a complaint to the Office for Civil Rights. You will see under here the Department of Health and Human Services. Patients don't mind a bit picking up the phone and reporting folks for breaching their privacy. And then it's up to this agency, the HHS or someone, to decide if we did break the rules. If we did, they can turn us into the Department of Justice. So that's how hospitals and doctors and insurance companies really kind of get in trouble with the government, is they are found to be guilty and then they're fined and the government gets the money for our error, not the patient whose information was breached. You would have to do something with that information and then a patient could sue you. So again, I don't want to muddy the waters, but what I'm trying to tell you is that if you have personally been involved in a breach, which is not unusual at all, because we've had about 100,000 medical breaches, or excuse me, 100 million medical breaches since we started keeping records. There's about 350 million in our nation. So that tells you about 1 in 3 or 4 people have had some sort of breach. So it happens out there quite a bit, and you feel like there's nothing you can do. And in some sense, there's not, unless somebody's really set out to do some harm to you. But that's a little rundown on HIPAA. Again, I'm not going to test you on this. I just want you to be familiar with the difference. What's an unauthorized disclosure? Again, this is back to HIPAA. This is still HIPAA information here. And unauthorized disclosure just means something left us. If it leaves, in my case, if it leaves Baptist Health and it goes anywhere else outside of Baptist Health, I got to figure out where it went and if we've got it out there at risk. And that would be what we call an unauthorized disclosure. That's if we fax it to the wrong place, if we give something to the wrong patient and they walk out with the wrong paperwork. This is problematic for us in healthcare, and I've got to know about it. A breach is when somebody does something that puts that information at risk. So a lot of folks, I get a lot of patients that will call and say, you guys have breached my information. And I'll say, well, what did we do? Where did it go? How can I help? And you'll find a lot of times that it didn't go anywhere. You know, the person that got the wrong paperwork brought it back and said, oh, this isn't mine. I don't want it. 99.9% of the population has good intentions. It's that 0.1 that you got to look out for that might take an opportunity to do something with information. And that's kind of going to be the theme as we go along. You know, accidents can happen, but you got to look at the recipient who got that information, and you'll decide then if there's trouble on the horizon. The average cost of a breach, you can see the different sectors out there in our economy. Healthcare is by far number one. One large breach, which is anything over 500 patients, becomes very expensive for an organization. And on average, if they have 500 or more patients who have been breached, 7.1 is the ticket right there. And I'll talk a little bit more what's involved with that cost in the next slide. But you can see healthcare being the highest one. This is another survey that was done, and I won't bore you with the Ponyman Institute, but they really do provide a lot of statistics to us for those of us that are really nerds and like to see how much these things are costing us. There is information out there, and per person in the healthcare sector, for every breach that we have, it roughly costs our organization $453. You see how much more that is than the other sectors. So those financial breaches and so forth, they're not quite as punitive as they are with healthcare. But here's what's involved. And you could really say that the cost, and this is what's involved in a HIPAA breach for a healthcare organization, but you could arguably say that this applies to any place where there is a breach of confidentiality or privacy. It's going to cost money to detect it and to respond to it. Sometimes legal fees are involved. You got to notify the victim or victims if there are several. Lost revenue, because there's nothing that says come see our physicians like a breach. People will flock away. I tell employees all the time, so long as you can't get a parking place within a mile of the organization, we must be doing well. But the day that you see plenty of places to park, there's either a pandemic or there could be a problem. So we kind of joke about that just a little bit, because people have choice. They'll go elsewhere if we are involved in a major loss of data, for sure. PR marketing, obviously, will take a hit. If CASA was involved in something major, then that could be a problem for us. People would no longer trust us. And we really rely on the trust of our clients and every customer. If you think about it, every person we touch is a customer in some way. And we need to gain that trust, not lose it by having this high level detail about our clients just laying around anywhere. Also, increased customer support. Nothing like sending a letter to someone that says your information has been breached. They will call you just as quickly as they can, because nobody likes the thought of their last OBGYN appointment being out there online, right? So they panic they call. And so that's added into the cost. It takes time to deal with that. And like I said, you could argue that that would affect any agency that's involved with something confidential getting away from you. So how can individuals be held responsible? And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here again. I just really do like to point out on this particular slide how individuals can be sued, okay? There are or held responsible in some way. Again, an invasion of privacy occurs when there's an intrusion upon someone's reasonable expectation to be left alone. An intentional tort, which means it's purposeful, it's a purposeful act that has been committed here. There are 4 types of invasion of privacy. One is intrusion of solitude. That's your peeping toms, okay? There's a reasonable expectation of privacy, but someone has intruded on that without you saying. So it's your peeping tom. That's someone illegally intercepting a private phone call. That's snooping through someone's private records. Those are things that action can be taken on. Appropriation of name or likenesses. I don't think really I've got to worry about this personally, but celebrities often have to. A business may use a celebrity's name or likeness in an advertisement. That can be a form of invasion of privacy as well. The third one might be the closest to a problem for you. But again, I'm going to point out why none of these really should apply to you after I'm done with the conversation here. But an individual could be held liable in most states if you publish private facts about another person. And I like that it qualifies it and says, even if it's true. So just because it's true doesn't mean you can spread it, okay? So be mindful of that. That's not really much of a defense in this. The fourth tort that's listed on here is a false light claim. That again, it's when you are using misleading information. You're casting someone in a false light. Now, the one thing that I hope that did come through when I was talking about each of the 4 of these is that there is intent. Intentional tort. You purposely set out to do something wrong. So the only way that public disclosure of private facts can get away from any of us as volunteers is if you use that information yourself intentionally in a bad way. So it's very tempting. I've got 6 CASA kids right now whose social security number I can see. I've got I can get the biological mother and father. I've got a lot of data that I could use, and I love this word, nefariously, but I could use that information and I could do something with it, and now I have an intentional tort. So the question becomes, well, what if it was just an accident? Well, that goes back to the fact that you just signed a confidentiality agreement with CASA. So you may not be individually sued, but you may lose your volunteership because you did not take reasonable protection of the data that you have. So again, I want to be sure that I'm very clear. HIPAA doesn't apply to you. Specifically, these intentional torts don't apply to you so long as you're not doing something with the data purposeful to expose that privacy. So we would go back again. The third thing we would look at then would be the agreement you made with CASA. So
Gwen,
tell me what I can do.
Gwen, I just thought of an example of that. I'm just curious if you know, just because I couldn't really think of too many other than this example that I've experienced. But the recent picture that was publicly defaming the Paducah City Schools superintendent. So would that be considered a reasonable reason for a lawsuit because it was a private image that was shared with intent to defame his character?
I think I know the situation that you're talking about. I'm not 100% sure, but there is a little bit of a clause that says, but is there a public need to know some of this information? So just because it's private, there could be that second level of Is there a need to know? Does it shed light that needs to be shed? So that would probably excuse some of that. And the reasonable expectation of privacy, you may have that, but if that picture's out on the internet or someone else has it, that expectation is kind of gone. You're hopeful that people will be nice about it, but you kind of lose that. It's only if you have taken every effort to make it private. You might have a leg to stand on, but they may come back around and say, hey, there was a need to know. There was a public need to know. People that are exposed for wrongdoing a lot of times, well, hey, that was my private business, but there was a need to know that you were behaving in an inappropriate way. So that's probably going to cut that out. That's an excellent question, Segue, did that kind of answer you on that?
Yeah, that was really helpful.
Okay.
I was thinking a lot about Facebook, but that clarified that too, because if they post it on their page and share it, well, they already made it public. So that clarified a lot. I'm
telling you, the stuff I have read on Facebook, I lurked on Facebook for years and didn't have a public persona until 2018. But I would go out there and I would lurk because I'd get reports of stuff that was posted online. And I'd have to go out there and read through it. And I ran across one lady who she'd easily put up 20 different medical records. And I had to go through every medical record, and it was all about her. I exit out and said, have a nice day. If you're putting it out there, it's not my obligation to keep it private. If she had mentioned one other patient or if she'd had anything else, we'd have had a problem. But people can put anything they want to out there. And if you're just not smart enough to set your security settings, that's not a reasonable excuse either. So it's a real tough sell. It really is a tough one, but excellent question. So looking at CASA itself, of course, this just is right up my alley. I love looking at Kentucky Revised Statutes, but I really didn't know before I prepared for this that we have a whole section out there in the Kentucky Revised Statutes, and it's under it's out there. The title is Unified Juvenile Code, Dependency, Neglect, and Abuse. And then you can drill down to CASA. So as you're looking at this particular rule out there, you can see that this is Chapter 620, Section 520 that I pulled from. CASA is out there. I looked up our sections 0.500 to 0.550. So there's more. This isn't all inclusive, but this is the one I kind of wanted to drill down on. But this information is out there about us as volunteers. I was specifically want to look at number 2 and number 3. Upon appointment by the court to represent a child, the CASA volunteer shall have access to all the information and records pertaining to the child, including but not limited to, and you can see everything that's listed on there. With court approval, the CASA volunteer may have access to information and records pertaining to the parents or persons exercising custodial control. So it kind of extends a little bit, but what this tells me right here is upon appointment with court approval. So I got to have something more that's going to tell me exactly what I can get into. And we'll look at that a little more closely further along because you have you sign something for every child that's going to define that. So another place where we see it with CASA, Liz, I believe, sent this to me, but this is another thing here that we all get to sign. It says, hey, this is my affirmation that I will keep information confidential. And it is very detailed. Confidentiality may be broken only under the following circumstances, and it tells you what those reasons are. Otherwise, everything you have needs to be kept private. You make an attestation that you've reviewed this information. You'll abide by the policies. And it's data including but not limited to. And you see that there's a ton of information out there. Sometimes I get information I don't even want. If I get the mental health records of the biological parents, I get in a panic. I'm like, I don't want to see this. I probably need it, and you don't know what to do. But we get a lot of information, and we are bound to keep that private, no matter how shocked you may be by it. That's not reason enough to go talking about it anywhere. But here's the real kicker here. I understand that violation of confidentiality of clients, employees, contractors, directors, volunteers, donors, or other agents, anybody in there, the garbage man, is cause for disciplinary action and may be cause for immediate dismissal. They tell you what they're going to do. So there should always be really a firm, consistent policy. If your expectation is confidentiality, spell it out, get a signature, and tell folks what's going to happen. If you breach confidentiality, here's what we do. So there you have it. Confidentiality guidelines. Now this, again, I took primarily from some of the national guidelines a little bit. CASA volunteers are responsible for maintaining confidentiality of all information to which they are exposed while serving as a volunteer, whether this information involves a party to their case or another program case. So we talked about that. You're sitting in court, you hear other cases. When we're doing study as a group and someone mentions their child, we try to keep it, minimum necessary information. But if you hear a name on somebody else's case, you got to keep that quiet too. You can't go talking about it. A CASA volunteer becomes an officer of the court. That's what CASA is. You're an officer of the court upon assignment to a case, and the court order details the confidential information to which you will have access. Any information pertaining to individual families or children that the CASA volunteer receives while doing your duties, it's confidential and cannot be used for any other purpose other than advocating for the children. Cut and dry. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now here I went out and I happen to have some of these available. I did a snippet of it just to show you. I think I've got 6 of those out there, in fact, for my kids. So I had plenty of opportunity to snippet this. But when you are assigned a case, here's where we reference back to that. I'm being told in here everything I've got access to. It just came almost right out of the KRS rules right there, as you can see. And it says, but not limited to. So that covers us for that mental health record that I don't like to get about the biological mother. And I'm not saying that we don't need that, but I like to get that information from my social worker probably just telling me, but to have the copy of the records makes me a little bit nervous, but we're covered, right? We're covered because we're not limited to certain things. And we sign this, and this is our agreement. This is our agreement that we take for each child that we are assigned. This form right here, I always like to point out, and we're going to talk about how to carry confidential information with you because the child's name will be on this form. But this is one of the best forms to take along with you, along with an ID, to get medical records for your children, okay? It's the best thing to prove who you are if you're attending IPA meetings at the school. If you are needing into the lily pad, I've used this form to prove who I am. Now, I'll often wear my little lanyard with my CASA name in it, but that's not as official as some people want to see. They want to see this thing right here. What will happen if you request medical records? They're likely to scan in a copy of your photo ID and this form right here into the record that you have requested, because that's how we as an organization protect ourselves from giving you that. So you need copies of this, but this is another one of those forms, as you might guess, you need to keep private. And we'll talk about how to best handle that. But very important when you are requesting medical records. I wanted to add that in there. While we're talking a little bit about medical records, I promised Liz that I would give a little bit of information. The law allows 30 days to get medical records. So if you show up at a pediatrician's office with all this in hand and you stand there and you're just ready for that copy of medical records, you are going to be shot down. I almost universally guarantee you that they are going to buy some time, and by law, they have 30 days and they can extend it to 60. So I get that when you request medical records, sometimes you want that instant gratification, but you may have to wait. Now, they may have a way to make that happen. And that's why a lot of times I try to coordinate with my social worker. Do you have them? Because if we can share, we're more likely to get that information more quickly. So if I'm going after medical records, which is always one of my favorite things to do, I will try to hit up that social worker to see if they've already made that request and will they share with me. Or I don't mind making the request and sharing backwards so long as I have Liz and Stephanie or someone's permission. I generally don't share stuff that I've not run by them, just for the record. That's kind of my MO. I'll end up sharing something I should never have given them. And so I like to funnel that through them. That way that gives your case manager a chance to take a look at what you've got as well. And let them forward. So that's not a bad way to handle that. I see a raised hand.
Looks like it's Richard and Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just going to say, anytime I've ever needed any kind of records, I've always contacted the office first of wherever it was I was needing the records from. And they always told me, upon providing the information that they requested, which is usually the court order and proof of identity, they'll give me a time when I could come down and actually pick up that paperwork. I've never gotten it in hand the day I asked for it.
Absolutely. That I would be shocked. And if I found out one of my offices did that, I'd probably have a hissy fit. But because there's only certain things that get released. There are some things that do get held back, and it's by law. They're not trying to hoodwink you. But that is absolutely the truth. They don't have time to just instantly quit and copy records a lot of times. And if they come back on you, I've had them more than once say, well, you've already requested those, because the social worker may have. And so now they're kind of confusing the two. So, you've got a right to get your own records, even if that social worker has already retrieved them. There's not an extra cost to you. You're a different party. You should be able to get those records without cost. If someone tries to charge you, something's not right. When it comes to this, somebody's trying to make a buck on the side or something. But there are some laws about that out there. You get one free set. Now, if you go back for a second set, if you're silly enough to say, I misplaced the first set, we got a big problem. But if you go back and try to get a second set, they do have the right to charge you at that point. And but we've got a bigger problem there if you got to go back for them again. But any other questions about medical records? I'm happy to, if something comes up later, I'm happy to hit it. But I did promise that I'd talk just a smidge about medical records. You may also be forced to sign a release of information form to go along with your order here, along with a copy of your ID. Not everybody asks for the ID, some do, but don't be surprised if you don't have to prove who you are when you show up for those records. They really do like to verify you are the one that's on that form for sure. So expect that and understand that those are the rules. They're not trying to be difficult. Going on into some more guidelines here. No disclosures of case information should be made to anyone who does not have a professional reason for receiving such information, such as the location of foster homes, the initial reporting source, and similar details of a child's case. Here's where you can play really dumb if you need to, but do not mistakenly tell a biological mother where the foster home is just because you have that information. Don't tell who the reporter was. You don't know. There might be some anonymous situation going on there, and we don't want to get in the middle of that. And any details about a child's case. It's really nice to be a holder of information, but be very careful about sharing that without knowing. And a lot of times I'll just say, I'm not real clear on that myself. Let me hit up Chris and see if he'll share that with you, that kind of thing. I just really can't caution you enough to be mindful of that kind of information getting away from you. That could be as much security as anything right there. We often, depending upon the situation, we withhold appointment information from families that may, if there's a criminal case pending, and we have, and I'm talking my professional role here, we have a foster family bringing in a child, and I've got DCBS representative there. It's not unusual for us to lock that chart to prevent the biological mother from knowing or father from knowing the next appointment time for security reasons, especially if they're in jail and things like that. That can pose a problem as well. So if you're really interested in when somebody's got their next appointment, you might run into some obstacles there just because of security. Physical security is a concern that we have. So just keep that in mind. Again, there should be no disclosure of case information to people not involved in the case or to the outside world in general. Sometimes it's really interesting to redact names and want to tell what you know. Can't do it. You can't do it. You'd be surprised in a small town community how people can figure things out. And all of you may be aware, but there are times when your case may have made the news in reference to situations that you're dealing with. Even, like I said, even if you don't say the name, I get this all the time. Well, I didn't say their name. Really? It was on the news that they were in a 4-car pileup. Of course, everybody knows who you're talking about. So be mindful of that. Just because you take away their name doesn't mean now I can talk about it freely. That does not count. Okay. No information. Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, because I know in talking of and looking at your slide, there are also times when there are professionals who it would be beneficial for them to know information, but it's not our information to share. And you may get into that later, but we have oftentimes where children were moved to a new therapist, for example, and the CASA's like, well, do they know that this child has this, this, and this, and this? No, they don't. What we need to do is, we can check in with them and say, have you talked with the social worker about some of the issues that may be going on? I think that might be beneficial to you, but we cannot disclose that information to a therapist, even though it's in the best interest of the child, because it's not our information to give. So they have a professional reason for receiving the information. We're just not the person who's supposed to give that information.
I always say there's a right way to get information, and don't be a party to giving it out the wrong way. We'll cooperate, even as an organization with Baptist. I'll cooperate with the police all day who need records from me, but they got to get them the right way. So that's exactly what Liz is talking about right here. We don't want to be a conduit for information that we don't own. So that's real important. I'm not sure that I touched on that, so I'm glad that you added that in there. Again, no information should be released to anyone not authorized to receive it. Only CASA staff may be used for support and guidance in one's volunteer experience. I feel like I've got a group of seasoned folks on here, and if you've dealt with Liz or Stephanie or Jen or any of them, you got all the support you could ever want there. So there's really not a lot of need to go spilling your guts to someone else and saying, what would you do? And so on and so forth. That's what they're there for. And I wouldn't be around after this many years if I had run into difficulty with that. Trust me, because I have needed them. At the beginning of a case, and I'm going to qualify this just a little bit, but at the beginning of a case, the CASA should be carefully should inform all parties that information you receive might go into a report. Just be honest with them. Tell them that it's going to go into a report and it's going to be shared with other parties, that kind of thing. The CASA needs to tell the parents and the child. You'll be speaking to many people. And I do that for two reasons. Not only because it's fair to them, but I like for them to know, don't lie to me. I'm going to talk to the next person you're going to say anyway. So you save yourself some trouble there. Just to be honest with you, I like to tell them, yeah, we have the ability and obligation to talk to everyone involved in the children's lives. And that just puts it out there on the table and says, I'm not hiding anything from you. It all out there. That's always a good thing to do. To tell folks, because and I'll explain a little more why here in a moment. But if the client chooses not to speak to you, then the client should be told that this is acceptable, but that goes in your report as well. And that's not a threat. That's just letting them know you're not likely to be shed in a very good light if that happens. And I had that happen recently. I turned in a report, and believe you me, between me turning in the report and the court date, biological mom managed to find me. Why? Because that report got to her lawyer, who said, you better call CASA. And I mean, now you're about to be exposed in court. So she did. She reached out to me, and oddly, we've had communication ever since. But here's really where I want to give you some caution. Never agree to withhold information if asked by any party. This is very important because you will have occasion where I've not been asked, but I've seen some things that I'll just say, Liz, law girl, you got to help me. I can't believe I saw this. Or they'll report a way that they discipline a child. I had that recent experience, and it made me cringe. But she never asked me not to say anything, but that would be one where they might say, oh, I'd rather you not tell that to anyone. Guess what? Don't make that promise. This is not a doctor-patient or lawyer-client situation. You do not have absolute privilege by any stretch of the imagination. Anything said or done it's fair game. It really is. And I'm not 100% sure if I have indicated in here that, if you come across something of an emergent nature, that's 1-800-Liz, Jen, Stephanie, it's somebody, but don't sit on emergency situations very long. If you suspect abuse or anything else that may be going on, that needs to be handled immediately. And I've got their cell phone numbers. I'm sure you guys do too. So if that meant 8:30 at night, I guess it'd mean 8:30 at night. But there are emergent situations where those need to be immediately reported. Anything else, Liz, that you can think of you might want to add to that necessarily?
I don't think that I can. I don't know, Stephanie, if you do. I feel like you've covered this very well. And just
Okay.
the note that I made about, if you're not sure, don't share.
Mm-hmm.
It did
Absolutely.
make me think about the few times that it would be just a kind gesture to share with people that are privy to the information. So if we did get a record that the caseworker or information that the caseworker needs to know, they're also in that bubble. And if you have a concern of whether or not they are, then you can ask the supervisor. But we wouldn't necessarily want to withhold information from, like, if they're in the cabinet's custody, then there might be appropriate time. So we want to err on the side of caution, but like Gwen said, if it's an emergency or if there's something really important, we also want to make sure that we are alerting people. And I wanted to mention too that me and Janie recently updated the release that Child Watch clients for therapy sign when they do their intake. So we didn't update much, just a few words to better reflect that relationship between the therapist and the CASA. So there is a release that the caregivers, the custodians sign when a child receives Child Watch therapy that allows information to go. The wording is just a little clearer to the CASA volunteer. So I forgot to mention that to you, Gwen, before, but we have that document as well when it's in-house therapy.
Gotcha. Nice. Good to know. Very, very, very smart to have agreements like that in place. It's just very necessary in this day and time. All right, we'll then move on to the next one. Liz, how much time do I have? Because I really want to be sure I get to everything, and I see that I'm.
It's got about another half hour, maybe 34 minutes or so.
Okay, we can do that. This, we're getting just a little bit more specific on guidelines as we move along here. Care should be taken by volunteers to protect the identity of clients within emails. You probably experienced that. We don't typically use the client's whole name. Sometimes we use a last name to identify the case. The client's initials, I also added in here numbers. I've got 6 children, so I could go number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6. I could identify them that way. I've got another problem. The 2 youngest ones are twins, so I would have to say boy or girl maybe, but there's ways to work around that to where I'm not full out emailing that information. You should use secure mail when possible. Typically Gmail and your Yahoos and things like that aren't quite as secure as maybe AOL or your provider through your home. A lot of times you have some sort of email client that's associated with your home. I use mine from work because it's very encrypted, but that's another thing to keep in mind, is that you really do need to use a very, very strong email client when you're sending stuff out that has PHI. Make sure your antivirus security protection is up to date for both your computer and phone. That's highly important. If you have Norton's or McAfee or any of those on your computer, generally you have several licenses where you can put that on your phone as well. I've got 2 cell phones and 2 computers that I have on my antivirus security protection. So that's another layer there. Always use a biometric, numeric, or a passcode for another layer of security for devices. Phones are hugely popular things to steal, right? And all of our lives are basically laid out in our cell phones. So you want to have that extra layer of protection. It doesn't really matter. All of these are pretty acceptable ways of doing it, but I recommend that for personal as well as professional reasons. Just have it to where after a certain amount of time, your phone locks and you have to have a passcode to get in. Personally, I use a pattern. I also can do fingerprint, but I've discovered it's one finger, so that's inconvenient for me because I'm always holding it with the other hand. So you can, again, whatever works best for you, have that layer to actually log into your phone to begin with is a good idea. Consider 2-factor authentication. If you do not know what that is, most of your passcodes are what they call a single sign-on. In other words, I'll go to Amazon and I've got my username and my password. That's a single sign-on right there. But a 2-factor authentication says I'm going to put that password in, and when I do, this app that's on my phone or computer is going to shoot me a push notification, and on my phone, I'll agree to that again, and then I'm in. So it's 2 layers. And if we do that at my work, if I'm remoting into work, and you may have seen this before, if you remote into work, it's not unusual to go through a 2-factor authentication where you get some sort of push notification. It can call you, but you can use an app, and there are several apps out there that you can set up for 2-factor authentication that will help you to log into your bank information, your healthcare information, anything like that. You can set it up yourself, and it's more than just that one password. Now, my Pinterest account, I don't care. I'm not going to set that up 2-factor authentication. If somebody wants my cabbage casserole recipe, knock yourself out. But if there's real information that I want protected, that 2-factor authentication I recommend it highly.
And Oh,
Mhm.
sorry. We do the same thing. We have rules about locking the office and even getting into the office, but I was going to mention, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were pausing. Um, to the first bullet point, we usually say during our orientation with the volunteers that to not use your work email because it could be accessed by the employer. If for certain times they can do that. So if you have a private individual account that only you know the password to, that's Gmail or something like that, we usually do recommend that.
Yeah, and I can absolutely see that. I just happen to work in healthcare where I have a specific policy where they won't do that to me. They do not have access to my password. I have to give them an authentication before they can take over my computer. I would probably not do that if not for that. So I'm so glad you pointed that out because again, I use that knowing that particular rule. So that I am really glad you mentioned that.
Or a shared account of computer as well. Same difference, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Log out of databases every time. Don't save passwords to phones, computers, or my favorite is a sticky note in close proximity to it. This is something I check for at work. I can't tell you how many times I'll turn over a keyboard and find a password underneath. That is just one of my favorite things to find because I will log on to their computer and I will email me and I'll know whose computer that was that did that. And then I'll turn around later and say, hey, how you doing? You don't know this, but you emailed me. Look down here where you emailed me on this date and time. I used to love doing that. I've got a mean streak in me, but it was to prove a point to people that I found your password, and that is a no-no. So don't be guilty of that. Keep it somewhere private and log out each and every time. A lot of websites will, I know Optima does, it happens to me all the time. It'll kick you out after a period of time if you lollygag too long, but not every site does that. And you definitely want to get out because it's that time when you're not in a website, but logged in. That's the prime time for things to be stolen because it's not fighting with your keystrokes. Someone can get in there and take over right away. So again, secure email, two-factor authentication we talked about, lots of detail on that. So this is kind of sort of maybe close to the last point to make maybe on here is that volunteers must ensure care with their case file. I remember a day when I had a huge notebook about that wide that I would pack around and was always nervous that information would get away from me. So from my perspective, I love Optima, and that is a perfect situation. Don't carry unnecessary paperwork around with you. I would advise you to get it scanned in to Optima, get it to the powers that be on the phone with us, get them to scan it in and then shred your copy. Don't even keep it around. No need to do that. But there may be times when you've got to transport some PHI or protected health information. And this is what I showed in that other training. So some of you may have already seen this. It's a pouch that locks. I've got a wonderful lock on it. I keep a key separate from it. Don't leave a key in it. That makes it useless. I'm hopeful that you understand that. So I open and then I can release. After I release, this particular pouch has enough room that I can carry a full ream of paper. This is my CASA file. I've got my appointments in here. I've got any notes that I need, and I keep it locked at all times. Don't leave it in your car overnight. Bring it into your house. Secure it a couple of different behind locks. I don't care where you put it within your house, but I recommend that you keep it nice and secure. I got this from Amazon. It's not a requirement. I'm not getting any money off of telling you about it, but it makes me feel better. I will tell you that this is really handy. Sometimes I can put my phone in it, my keys and everything. Just don't put the key in there and then lock it. Have a little sense. But they're really handy to carry around with you. And you may not be able to see it, but this one has a return to me, to the privacy officer at Paducah, if it's found. And you can offer a reward. You don't have to put the amount, but people may be a little more likely, and pitch them $10. Trust me, it's worth $10 to get it back, in my opinion. I'll figure out, I'll return Coke cans or something to get the money to pay for that all day long. But it's really important that you have some way for that to get back to you if found, because remember, 99% of people are honest folk and they want to do the right thing. So make that opportunity possible for it to get back. But I would not mark it up that, and tell anything that's in it. Don't make it too tempting for anyone to want to get into it. Just a return to you kind of thing should be sufficient for that. They do make them at all shapes and sizes, but if you're interested, go out there and take a peek, see what you find. Now, that's really the end of that conversation. And I want to talk about, at this point, to me, this is always the more interesting part of the discussion, because it may be totally new information to you. But we talk about this, this stuff getting stolen. Well, where does it go? Where does someone go to sell all these social security numbers that are so important? Well, that would be the dark web, most likely, but you need to have a basic understanding of the internet as a whole. There are 3 levels to the internet. You have the surface web, you have the deep web, and you have the dark web. The surface web is a very common part of the web for shopping or social media. It's not necessarily password protected. It's when I get on and I just must have something from Etsy, or again, I want to go look at, anything out there. I want tickets to a show. The surface web is where we do a lot of our shopping and looking around. Believe it or not, it's only about 4% of the internet, though. You would think it would be a lot greater, but it's a very small part of the internet. The deep web is the biggest part of the internet. The deep web can only be accessed with a special link or special permission. You have to be allowed into a cloud drive. You can't search for it. It's password protected. Think along those lines. It could be an internal company site. It could be a school intranet. It can be an online database, member-only websites, those kind of things, or any pages behind paywalls where you've had to pay to get in there. It may require special software to access. So that's where the bulk of the internet is actually in the deep web itself. It accounts for about 90% of what's out there. It will not be indexed because it's not accessible to the public. So that means I can't search for it. You kind of got to go to it. You got to know it's there. So that's yes.
Would that be kind of like how our Optima program is? Because you can't
Absolutely.
search Optima and get into that. You have to have that. Okay.
The surface web would be me searching for the Optima login page. That's surface web. Once I access with a password, I'm now in deep web, and it's more protected. So that's a perfect example right there. They're just purposely hidden. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's just not for public consumption, in other words. So that's your deep web. Now, the dark web is a hidden network of websites that use a masking software. You can't just go to the dark web with your typical browser. If you're using Chrome, if you're using Edge, Bing, any of those wonderful browsers, those won't get you to the dark web. You have to have a special piece of software that you search, and it will hide your IP address. So again, it provides that anonymity, right? And that's where we think that all these nefarious characters are. People are really afraid of the dark web. That's where all the bad things happen. It's not all bad. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. But again, it's a good place to go if you don't want an IP address traced. I won't get into too deep, but again, it's a vast digital underground where hackers, gangsters, terrorists, even pedophiles go. Unfortunately, you can use a software program called the Onion Router. It's actually the software that's used to access the dark web. It's one of the most popular ones. There are several browsers out there, but it's the most popular one out there. And again, it bounces you around everywhere to where you stay hidden. And you can see that there could be good and bad from that. And examples of goods and services found on the dark web out there. Drugs, of course, are out there. Individual or dealer level quantities of illicit and prescription drugs are available. I can remember way back in the day when I was in school, we discussed the Silk Road, which was an FBI case where they closed down off the dark web a drug superstore that had done $200 million worth of business in 28 months. So it's out there, it's real. You shut one down, another one comes up because there are marketplaces on the dark web, just like there are on the surface web. You can search for anything out there. And if somebody's wanting to provide that service, here you have it. Counterfeit currency. You can buy roughly $2,500 worth of counterfeit U.S. notes for $600, and they promise that they'll pass the ultraviolet light test and pen test. So currency is out there. Forged papers. Passports, driver's license, citizenship papers, fake IDs, college degrees, you name it, you can get any forged paper out there that you want to for a few $1,000 typically. Firearms, ammunition, and explosives are out there. Handguns, C4 explosives are available. Vendors will ship their product in shielded products to avoid x-rays and that kind of stuff. It's out there, people. They'll pack it like it's a musical instrument and send it to you. Hitmen, I like this. One advertisement says permanent solutions to common problems. So if you need a hitman, you can go out there. I'm not encouraging this. I want to be clear about that. I'm not teaching you how to hire a hitman. I'm just saying it's out there. But again, they will accept Bitcoin and provide proof of death. So if you are interested in that, there you have it. Human organs, you can get out there, you can get the black market for live organs. Kidneys can get you around $200,000. Hearts are only worth about $120,000. Livers, $150,000, and you can get a pair of eyeballs for $1,500. So there you have it. If you're in the market for some body parts, they sell it out there. So now what I've done probably is scare you a little bit and say, oh, I don't want any part of this. There are some good reasons to go out there. Again, if you have maybe a spy that wants to avoid censorship, we all remember that case several years ago with Snowden that went out to the dark web and reported WikiLeaks. We've all heard of that. The New York Times has a lockbox there, and those are growing in popularity, and it provides a way for people to report things to journalists. Journalists really like the dark web because people want to maintain their anonymity, and this is a way that they'll do that, is to go out to the dark web and they'll drop their report into that box for the New York Times. And I read that several people are doing that out there. So another good reason to have the dark net. Medical advice, especially surrounding drug use. It could actually be a key to fighting drug abuse and drug issues because people are more comfortable talking to a doctor on the dark web and saying, I don't really want to tell my doctor, he knows I've got diabetes and congestive heart failure, but what I haven't told him is that I also smoke marijuana and I eat Lortab and have 3 bourbon cocktails before bed. What's that going to do to me if I tell everything? So people are a lot more honest, and there's a lot of connections that can be made on the dark web. So again, I've read several things that say that it might actually be a key to fighting drug abuse. Survivors of abuse, and this is another reason I'm kind of pulling it into CASA just a little bit. Survivors of abuse can find solace out there because they may feel like they can freely discuss their experiences. So there's been some use of that. Especially for folks that really do have fear that they're going, someone in the home might chase them down. They can go out to the dark web and they can have these conversations with other folks. And another possible good, purpose for the dark web out there. Facebook reports that over 1 million people access this site via the dark web. Believe it or not, you can go out there and you can search anything and remain anonymous. I've been tempted, so they'll quit with all the ads. But anyway, you can log on to Facebook via the dark web and it won't be able to chase you. It won't know who you are. So some interesting stuff there. So really one of the last slides to share here is just the cost of what this is in terms of real dollars. I always like to point out the medical records down here. Medical records are worth $1 up to $1,000. Depends on how much information they can get. Social security numbers are so 1990s. I'm telling you straight up. You can get those for $1 or $2. Medical records are where it's at, and you guys will have that in your possession potentially. And so we would not want our information to get stolen and then sold out there. Because especially with children, it's tough to catch it. They're not applying for credit or anything yet. Children are victims of identity theft, folks. They are victims, and you don't want to be a party to that because, again, it won't get caught. Someone steals my credit card information, I'm going to know about it real quick. If I open one in the name of a child who's not applying for that credit, it may not be found for 30 years. You hear stories about that all the time. They get 18 or 19 years old and then they're denied some credit because somebody's already ruined their credit by stealing their identity. So it's real. This is what happens out there, just to kind of bring it home to you a little bit. So the key takeaways, everybody loves to see that slide. That means this is almost over. HIPAA applies to covered entities and not to individuals. Remember that again. Confidentiality is more of an ethical concept. Privacy is a right according to the law. There can be a financial or reputational cost related to disclosure of confidential information. Many nefarious characters are interested in it. It's not just that it can be done, people are going after it. So you want to be mindful. Protecting confidentiality and privacy requires each volunteer to put reasonable safeguards in place, and you can do it. Lock your office, lock your materials, log out of your computer. There's 1,000 ways in which you can decrease the risk of that information. So, all that being said, I have to always give this at the end. The views, interpretations, and opinions herein are my own, and you can't hold Baptist liable for them. So I'm obligated to put that on there. You do see that I have an email address there. You are more than welcome to contact me via email. In fact, that's probably the best way. If this has generated a question for you, if you've got a medical record question, I might be able to help you or get you in the right direction. And I'm happy to do that at any point for any of you that might want to reach out. And of course, everybody loves Medea. So there's your brilliant cartoon for today. That's all I've got. A whole lot of information that I've thrown at you. Hopefully you're still awake. But I'll entertain any questions, or if everybody's ready for supper, you're welcome to email me, however you want to handle that. So Liz, it's back to you, my friend.
Gwen, excellent job. Thank you so very much for this presentation. I feel like, I mean, I took 2 pages of notes myself, just to be reminded, because I think sometimes we get so used to doing the work that we do and we know that it's important, but the part about keeping it safe kind of falls by the wayside, or just because we're texting back and forth things or emailing, I remember when I started not using full names, and I don't know that I've got to go back and look at that. So I'm so grateful for everything that you shared with us tonight. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, you can simply unmute and ask. Anyone? Of course, I think you did so well with that. Anybody trying? Let's see, I'm just looking to see if I see any faces that are trying to talk or are talking and that you're muted.
They hungry, Liz.
They're hungry, that's right. Well, Gwen was kind enough to give you her email address. So if you have any specific questions about some of the things she shared, of course, as she stated again and again, Stephanie, Jen, and I are always available to you if you have questions. And I'll just say it again, if you're not sure, don't share. That's just the best advice that I can give to you. Because as Gwen said, it's much easier and the correct way to ask for permission instead of forgiveness, because we can't walk back and get that information that's already out there. So thank you all so much for being here. Stephanie, do you have any parting words that you want to share?
I just thought it was excellent. And like you said, Liz, several things that even as staff, we just hadn't talked about in a while and maybe forgot about. And I really liked the comment about just get it into Optima as soon as possible and then shred it. I think about my string of text messages with all the volunteers I supervise. We usually have long strings of text messages that I just need to delete from my phone, even though my phone is password protected. Once that conversation is in Optima, there's no reason to keep it anymore. So just really, really helpful reminders. And I might have a nightmare about the dark web tonight, but very interesting information. So, and you're a great presenter. Thank you, Gwen.
Yes.
Well, I'm passionate about it, and that's why I said if you truly have questions, certainly let me know. But
I think that's
add on to that, delete your emails too. Be sure to delete your emails and delete from the delete file to totally get them out of there, because that can be a risk too. So when you said that about the phone, I thought, oh, that's true of email.
Well, and the same thing, because everything, any document that you want to look at in Optima downloads it to your computer or to your phone. So I always try to remember when we're doing Optima trainings to say, once you've looked at a document, if you don't need it anymore, even if you do need it, put it somewhere safe, maybe save it under a different name, but be sure to delete it from your download folder, because that's another place where anytime you look at it, we don't think about that it's downloading, but in Optima, it does download. So many of those things for us to think about to keep the kids safe that we advocate for. And you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't care about these kids.
Absolutely.
And I do know that there are some folks who prefer to have paper copies of things. And so I think that your suggestions about how to keep those safe and from any prying eyes or potential person who might just happen upon it innocently were really excellent. And then, of course, if you do keep a paper copy, that at the end of the case, anything that is not duplication from Optima, then you would turn into the program. And that's in all of the paperwork that you sign as well. So just excellent, Gwen. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you all for hanging out here with us on a Tuesday evening. Again, if you haven't signed your name in the chat bar, I think that Stephanie and I got everybody signed in, so I think we're good with that. And just be looking for the next e-news to come out. If you haven't gotten it by March 1st, reach out to your supervisor and say, hey, has that come out yet? Because there's all kinds of good information in there. We don't share things just for the sake of sharing. We really try to make it interesting and informative for you so that you know what's going on and the opportunities that are available to you out there. And anytime we have a session like this, if we have gotten the permission from the presenter, which I think I remembered to get from Gwen, at least I told her when I started recording it, it's not something that we'll share in public, but it is something that we will share in those e-news with anyone that receives that might like to watch that recording later. But you will get the full benefit by coming here in person. So you'll get a little bit more CEU credits for showing up in person and watching it live, because it is so much better when we can have some of those conversations together. So I thank you all. Gwen, again, thank you. Bravo. We're so grateful for all of your prep time and everything you've done to help us in this area. So if anybody, unless anybody has a last question, then we will say good night for now. And we will be sure to get the certificate to the office, and then I'll put all of your hours into Optima, so you don't have to worry about that, but you will get credit for this training tonight. All right. Thank you all so much, and good night. Thanks for being here. Good to see your faces. Excellent. I've got to figure out where to stop recording.
Thank you for hosting.